MechAssault is highly remembered for its online capabilities, as when this Battletech spin-off launched in 2002, it was one of the very first Xbox Live capable games for online multiplayer. It was produced in collaborative effort between Day One and FASA Studios to enable console players a taste of the stompy robot world of Battletech. It plays out in a third-person shooter style, more arcadey feeling than the standard MechWarrior series of games the IP is known for. While most players remember this one for the late-night player-versus-player matches, it did have an entire single-player campaign. I did do a full review video on that if you'd like to check it out, but I have yet to dig into the sequel. Before we get to MechAssault 2, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Hi, I'm Empty. I made this YouTube channel specifically to focus on giant robot games. This video is a fully compiled list of every mech game that was ever released onto the original Xbox platform, broken into a few categories, that being only on Xbox, multi-platform releases, and games regionally locked. If you'd like to keep up with my videos, I always appreciate a like and a sub, but if you just want to chat about piloting mechanical war machines, feel free to hit up the comment section. Thanks, now let's get back to gaming. MechAssault 2 Lone Wolf, while tending to turn hardcore Battletech fans away with its more action-oriented combat and lore-breaking plotlines, I do remember having a much more fully realized single-player experience than the first initial game. In this one, you actually get the ability to go on foot in between the mechs and heavily utilize a more Iron Man-styled power suit to cause all sorts of destructive mayhem. Now this one I feel doesn't get brought up nearly as much as the first game, and I think that's because it released in 2004. By this point there was significantly more competition in the online gaming space, and to prove my point, the release date for this one was actually pushed back in the wake of Halo 2. And I think no one needs an introduction to that one. Coming exclusively to the Xbox console in 2002, Phantom Crash brings a sort of story-driven arena shooter-type third-person mech gameplay style. This one is a very text-heavy experience created by the Japanese studio Genki, known mostly for racing games, and it was published by the short-lived South Korean studio Fantagram. Now, Phantom Crash did get a sequel called SLAI, Steel Lancer Area International, but that one was actually a PlayStation 2 exclusive, so we'll have to wait to get into that for another time. What I can say about Phantom Crash, however, is that it is very, very stylish. I love the visual look of the scoot vehicles with their weighty and rounded edges. I love the off-the-wall soundtrack choices that play in the background of Unreal Tournament-style rumbling death matches. This one even has a pretty substantial upgrade customization option, unlike a lot of other mech games on the original Xbox. Biggest downside, the screens of dialogue feel like they go on forever in between combat matches. While Griffon Allied Strike takes place in the year 2024, this overlooked title actually released back in 2004, and is seemingly the last of a franchise. Griffon initially started in the 90s back on the Sega Saturn before getting a sequel, Griffon 2, a PS2 exclusive, Griffon Blaze, and finally the Xbox game, crafted by Game Arts. As in the name, Griffon, you take to the land and the skies in a single machine as you bounce between cockpit or third-person views to blast away other machines of war. While I haven't played this one myself, I've heard battle stories about its difficulty and lack of coherent story. I've got a hunch, based on the sign-in failed message permanently etched into the user interface, that this one was meant to be an online experience and it just never managed to take off. Recently added this one blindly into my collection, and when testing the disc to make sure it worked, the first splash screen appeared. Ubisoft. I brought my palm over my face and sighed. Alas, I had been tricked into buying a Ubisoft game again. That was until the next splash screen, which was very surprising to me, From Software. These guys, that probably don't need an introduction, really exploded into popularity with Dark Souls, but have a deep history with mech games, the most popular being the Armored Core series. On the other hand, Murakumo, Renegade Mech Pursuit, seems to be a bit of a forgotten oddball. While this 2002 release is a third-person shooter, it's got a strange and unique gameplay style. It's not really a straight-up combat game, not really a dogfighting aerial combat thing or a rail shooter. It's not really a racing game, but something that kinda takes pieces of all of those to make this a pursuit game? A game of chase, like high-flying Mecha Tag. Steel Battalion is something of a holy grail for any mech enthusiast. Probably more of a piloting simulation than a game, really. This is the big boy title with that big boy price, and the reason for that is that it has its own controller set with joysticks and switches and knobs and even foot pedals. I think the biggest portion of playing the game is just flipping through the instruction booklet and trying to figure out what button combinations make the vertical tanks move or expel excess heat, or something as simple as keeping it from toppling over. Okay, so this was made jointly by Japanese Nude Maker and Capcom. It initially launched in 2002, but also got an online-only expansion in 2004, which was called Line of Contact. There was also a third release later on the Xbox 360, which was subtitled under the name Heavy Armor, and it used the Xbox 360 Kinect instead of a crazy full-on simulation controller. Very easily you could maybe say that this is a novelty product, but anyone who is willing to shell out the retail price of 200 bones, the same cost of the Xbox console itself back then, or, let's look at the current market collector's price. Geez, for this fancy controller is a die-hard mech fanatic, and I still frequently have this limited series brought up in my comments asking if I ever make mention to specifically bring up the continued online fanbase. I guess the community over there managed to find and crack a production disc to get extra unreleased levels added into their emulation servers? Regardless, Steel Battalion is a super cool thing, and I really wish somebody would take the helm, bringing something like this back in the modern day and age. How cool would it be to see a Steel Battalion style controller revival fitted with a VR headset? The Robotech franchise saw two multi-platform entries by an American group called Vicious Cycle Software, the first being Robotech Battlecry, published by TDK Mediactive in 2002, and the second being Robotech Invasion, published by Global Star in 2004. Battlecry was an early adopter to the cel-shaded graphical style and focus more on third-person. Forgive me if I get this wrong, not really a Robotech guy. Battloid Veritex, the humanoid-styled robot suits that transform into fighter jet planes. On the other hand, Invasion sees you play in a more stereotypical Xbox graphics set as a human in a cyclone motorcycle transforming power suit thing. Here the gameplay is more centered around first-person shooter, though there is a third-person option. Now, like I said, I'm not a big Robotech buff, but my research today has let me know Invasion is based in the third Robotech series, which was called New Generation, while the former, Battlecry, was based on the Macross Saga, which is the first Robotech animated series. Fun fact, the 16th episode of Robotech the Macross Saga was named Battlecry. Before the British game developers at Rage Games went bankrupt, in 2003 they produced Gunmetal, which released in 2002 before being ported to PC a couple of years later. Similarly to MechAssault, Gunmetal is another third-person mecha shooter based on a war humans are having out in space on a planet named Helios. Something different here, though, is that Gunmetal takes a page from Robotech or Macross and lets your machine of war transform between a humanoid Havoc suit or Havoc jet form at the push of a button. While the game does have 14 missions, it does have a very, very short playtime, unless you're keen on replaying those missions with further unlocked weapons. Don't confuse Gun Space Metal, the Xbox game, with Gunmetal No Space, the computer game from 1998. Fans of the fighting tripod machines from War of the Worlds will find friends with the machines of Battle Engine Aquila. This 2003 first-person shooter was crafted by British Lost Toys before their dissolution later that year. Initially published by Infogrames Europe onto the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox, it was also ported via Encore Software as a Windows PC game. It has a plot centering around a planet called Allium, where the polar ice caps have melted and caused mass flooding, which seems to have caused a war between Forseti and Muspel humanoids. You get a few Battle Engine choices to play out simulated war scenes with, shooting down foot soldiers, machines, and crafts of air and sea. Speaking of, you can also take your jellyfish-looking Battle Engine into those spaces. Take her crab walking on the land or jellyfish floating in the air. Definitely an interestingly designed game that was never really pulled into mainstream attention. From Software's second entry into this list is Metal Wolf Chaos. Initially, this cult classic was a 2004 Japanese exclusive release, that is until Devolver Digital saw the extensive worldwide appeal and decided to remaster this one as Metal Wolf Chaos XD, and that would have been in 2019. So what makes this one stand out from the rest of the crowd? If you couldn't tell by the B-roll footage, its tone is that of over-the-top good old USA American patriotism. Of course, the appeal is already there for a From Software mech game, but that combined with this unique setting of near parody is something that really entices audiences and also makes it a little odd that it wasn't released in the States in the first place. Here's a quote by the game's producer, Masanori Takeuchi, that perfectly encapsulates the vibes. "It is America as perceived by the Japanese. It's completely fictional, but at the time, it was our idea of this ideology of American culture and comic book heroes, and we pieced that together, and it became the president piloting the mech. We think that when Japanese look at it this way, from the American point of view, it's almost like how they imagine a Japanese ninja, and sort of the same ideologies, the same kind of fantasy, so it goes two ways." Published by the short-lived Kikou company and developed by Production I.G, ExaSkeleton released to only the Japanese market in 2003. This is another one of those third-person shooter games where the combat itself is more arena-style, like sports ball, except the sport is kicking each other's butts in giant robot frames. In between the battles, there are long swaths of text to designate conversations between all the characters. I believe this is substantial enough that the game is considered into the visual novel category. I think something that is lacking in this title, but besides English translations, is mecha frame customizability. I found this one very hard to find information for. Really off the radar. I could be wrong, but I am led to believe the Plus edition that is present on the Xbox is an updated port of the PS2 title. As far as I can tell, this series looks to be third-person shooter style with designs heavily influenced by Gundam. It appears there are a few games in the series, Kikou, Heidan, J Phoenix, plus Burst Tactics, Joshuhin. They all seem to be published by the Japanese toy company Takara and made by a studio named Shueisha. If you have a solid dose of knowledge about this series, we'd love to see it in the comments. On a world named Iron Star, you take control of a droid named Glitch as they battle against evil Millbots in this third-person shooter adventure. Kinda reminds me of a Ratchet and Clank a bit, with some 3D platformer style elements as well as a cartoony vibe. I didn't play this one specifically myself, but I'd seen it in passing, since I had my own original Xbox back in the day. One of the neighbors, I guess to impress me because I was the older kid, always made it a point to tell me the game looked kiddie, but was actually cool. Anyways, I think that it doesn't have actual pilotable humanoid mechs, but has enough overall theme overlap that it deserves a mention here. Robots, check. Explosions, check. Piloted vehicles and tanks, check marks to that too. This one was a singular release by the Americans of Swingin' Ape Studios before their acquisition by Blizzard Entertainment. It was published by Sierra Entertainment under Vivendi Universal in 2003, and it did in fact also get a GameCube and PlayStation 2 release if the Green X isn't your console of choice. This one is also a bit hard for me to research, being an American and all, but I'm led to believe that Sega produced a series of arcade system cabinets that utilized the Xbox motherboard, these being called the Sega Chihiro arcades. Now, it's really not a long list of titles for these things, but notably to the video title, of course, there was a mech game. That would be the twin-stick shooter Gundam Battle Operating Simulator. I guess this was actually the very first FPS game set in the Gundam universe, and that's a pretty cool piece of trivia. And that is every mech game ever released on the original Xbox console. If you liked this video, go ahead and drop a comment down below letting me know which retro console's list of mecha games deserves to be showcased next. Thanks.